The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Sweetwater Creek, Arizona Territory, 1875, as Jedediah James stood, revolver smoking in his weathered hand. The outlaw at his feet would no longer terrorize stagecoaches along the western route. Jed holstered his weapon with practiced ease, his reputation as the territory's most formidable bounty hunter solidified by yet another successful hunt. Little did he know that his carefully constructed solitary life was about to collide with a force more unstoppable than any outlaw he'd ever tracked. "Good riddance," Jed muttered, tipping his hat to block the merciless afternoon sun. The late summer heat shimmered across the landscape as he mounted his chestnut stallion, Copper. The bounty for this particular miscreant would keep him comfortable through the coming winter months, assuming he lived that long. In his line of work, tomorrow was never guaranteed. The small frontier town of Sweetwater Creek appeared on the horizon as dusk painted the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples. Jed had been riding the Western Territories for nearly a decade since the war ended, taking whatever work came his way. At 32, his face bore the marks of a hard life, a thin scar across his left cheek, perpetual stubble on his jaw, and eyes that had seen too much death. The saloon's familiar raucous noise greeted him as he pushed through the swinging doors. Sheriff Clayton nodded in acknowledgement as Jed dropped a blood-stained wanted poster on his desk. "Freeman's no longer a problem," Jed said simply. "He's tied to my horse. You can collect what's left of him." Clayton scratched his graying beard. "That makes 5 this month, James. The territory's running out of outlaws at this rate." "There's always another," Jed replied, accepting the payment with a nod. "Always another." The sheriff counted out the coins carefully. "You ever think about settling down, son? Man can't live forever with just his horse and gun for company." Jed pocketed the money without responding. He'd heard this speech before, from well-meaning folks who couldn't understand that some men weren't made for hearth and home. The war had taken that part of him, the part that could trust, that could love. Better to ride alone than to risk that kind of pain again. "I'll take a room at Mrs. Peterson's for the night," he said instead, heading out at first light. "Suit yourself," Clayton sighed, "but there's a social tomorrow evening. New schoolteacher just arrived from Boston. Might do you good to remember there's more to life than hunting men." Jed tipped his hat and turned away. A schoolteacher from Boston. Just what this dusty little town needed: another Eastern woman with fancy ideas and no understanding of the harsh realities of frontier life. Dawn broke with the promise of scorching heat as Jed prepared to leave town. He'd slept poorly, plagued by the same nightmares that had haunted him since Shiloh. Loading his saddlebags with fresh supplies, he was interrupted by the commotion of an arriving stagecoach, an unusual occurrence this early. Curiosity got the better of him as he watched the vehicle lumber to a stop. The driver looked frazzled, his face ashen. "Indians?" Sheriff Clayton asked, emerging from his office. "Worse. Holloway's gang," the driver spat. "Ambushed us 10 miles back. Only reason we got away is they seemed more interested in the supply wagon behind us." A chill ran down Jed's spine. Sam Holloway was notorious, with a bounty higher than any outlaw in the territory. He'd been responsible for a string of particularly brutal robberies along the mail routes. The stagecoach door opened, and Jed found himself frozen in place as a young woman stepped down. She wore a simple blue traveling dress, dusty from the journey, but still impossibly elegant. Her auburn hair was partially escaping its pins, framing a face that struck him immediately with its quiet determination and surprising beauty. "Miss O'Hara," Mrs. Peterson called, hurrying forward. "We weren't expecting you until next week." The woman, clearly the new schoolteacher, offered a smile that transformed her entire face. "I decided to come early to prepare the schoolhouse, though I must say, our journey was more adventurous than anticipated." Her voice carried the refined tones of Eastern education, but lacked the condescension Jed had expected. There was something in her manner, a certain resilience that seemed at odds with her delicate appearance. "Rebecca O'Hara," she introduced herself as her gaze met his. "And you are?" "Just leaving," Jed replied curtly, turning back to his horse. Sheriff Clayton chuckled. "Don't mind him, Miss O'Hara. That's Jedediah James, best tracker and bounty hunter in 3 territories, but his manners could use some work." Rebecca's eyes widened slightly. "A bounty hunter? How fascinating. I've read about your profession, Mr. James, but never met a real one. It's not fascinating, madam. It's bloody work. Jed tightened Copper's saddle straps with unnecessary force. And now, if you'll excuse me. Actually, Sheriff Clayton interjected, since you're heading out, would you mind escorting Miss O'Hara to the schoolhouse? It's on your way, and with Holloway's gang in the area. Jed clenched his jaw. The last thing he needed was responsibility for an Eastern schoolteacher. But the mention of Holloway changed things. No decent man would leave a woman unprotected with such danger lurking. Fine, he conceded reluctantly. But I'm leaving right after. Rebecca's smile was immediate and disarming. I appreciate your gallantry, Mr. James, reluctant though it may be. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple wooden structure in need of attention. During the short walk, Rebecca filled the silence with observations about the town and questions about the territory that Jed answered with minimal words. Will you stay for the social tomorrow evening? She asked as they reached the building steps. No, madam. I've got a job waiting in Tucson. She nodded, seemingly unsurprised by his response. Of course. The pursuit of outlaws waits for no man, I imagine. Something in her tone made him look at her directly. There was no mockery there, only genuine interest. Why would someone like you choose to come to a place like this? He found himself asking. Boston has proper schools, civilization. Rebecca's gaze turned toward the distant mountains. Perhaps I wanted something real, Mr. James, something beyond drawing rooms and pretense. She smiled again, that transformative expression. Thank you for your escort. Safe travels. As Jed rode away from Sweetwater Creek, he found Rebecca O'Hara's words echoing in his mind more persistently than he cared to admit. Something real. Wasn't that what he'd been searching for himself all these years? The intended journey to Tucson never materialized. 10 miles outside of town, Jed came across the remnants of the ambush the stagecoach driver had described. The supply wagon had been thoroughly looted, the driver dead. But what caught Jed's tracking eye were the distinctive boot prints of Sam Holloway, a custom-made heel with a star design that Jed had tracked before. And they weren't heading away from Sweetwater Creek. They were circling back toward it. Night had fallen by the time Jed returned to town, pushing Copper hard. The social was in full swing at the town hall, lanterns glowing in the windows as music drifted into the street. He tied his horse outside the sheriff's office, but found it empty. Clayton was likely at the social, along with every other able-bodied person in town, along with Rebecca O'Hara. Jed cursed under his breath. He had no proof Holloway was planning to hit the town tonight, just a tracker's instinct and those distinctive boot prints. But that instinct had kept him alive for years, and he wasn't about to ignore it now. The town hall was transformed by paper decorations and tables laden with food. Couples danced to the music of a fiddle and piano, while others chatted in small groups. Jed spotted Rebecca immediately. She wore a simple green dress, her hair arranged more elaborately than that morning. She was laughing at something the blacksmith's son was saying, her face animated in a way that made something twist uncomfortably in Jed's chest. Sheriff Clayton noticed him first. James, thought you'd be halfway to Tucson by now. We've got trouble, Jed said quietly. Holloway, I think he's planning to hit the town tonight. Found his tracks circling back. Clayton's expression darkened. You sure about this? Most of the town's valuables are right here tonight. Exactly? Jed's eyes scanned the crowded room, calculating. How many men can handle a gun? Maybe 15, counting the older boys. Clayton frowned. But they're not fighters, Jed. They're farmers, shopkeepers. Rebecca appeared at Clayton's elbow, her smile fading as she sensed the tension. Sheriff, is something wrong? Before either man could answer, the first gunshot shattered the window. Screams erupted as glass rained down on the dancers. Nobody move! A voice bellowed from outside. This is Sam Holloway! We've got this place surrounded! Chaos erupted as people scrambled for cover. Jed instinctively grabbed Rebecca's arm, pulling her behind an overturned table as more shots rang out. Stay down, he ordered, drawing his revolver. To his surprise, she showed no signs of hysteria. Her face was pale but composed. How many are there? Holloway usually rides with 6 men, Jed answered, peering over the table's edge. Sheriff, get these people to the back rooms. Clayton nodded, already herding terrified townspeople toward the kitchen and storerooms. Jed could see at least 3 figures moving outside the windows. "I can help," Rebecca said quietly beside him. "I'm not unfamiliar with firearms. Mr. James." Jed stared at her in disbelief. "This isn't Boston, Miss O'Hara. These men kill without hesitation." "I'm aware." Something in her expression shifted. "My father was a Union officer. He made sure his daughters could protect themselves." Before Jed could respond, the front doors burst open and 2 armed men entered, bandanas covering the lower half of their faces. "Ladies and gentlemen," one called out mockingly, "we'll be taking your valuables tonight. Watches, jewelry, cash, all of it. Cooperate, and you might live to see morning." Jed signaled to Clayton across the room, who had positioned himself behind the piano. 3 other men in the crowd had drawn hidden weapons. 5 against Holloway's 7, not great odds, but not impossible. "When I move, get to the back rooms with the others," Jed whispered to Rebecca. She nodded, but the determined set of her jaw told him she might have other ideas. Jed fired first, his shot catching one of the intruders in the shoulder. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions as the townspeople screamed and ducked for cover. Holloway's men returned fire, wood splintering as bullets tore through tables and chairs. In the confusion, Jed lost track of Rebecca. He took down another outlaw with a shot to the leg before spotting her, not in the back rooms as instructed, but crouched by the side entrance, a small derringer in her hand. As he watched in astonishment, she fired with remarkable precision at an outlaw who'd been aiming at Clayton, the bullet grazing the man's arm and causing his shot to go wide. Outside, horses whinnied in panic. The shooting had spooked them. And Jed heard the distinctive sound of animals breaking free from their hitches. Holloway's escape plan was literally running away. "Sam, the horses!" one of the bandits yelled. A tall figure appeared in the doorway, Holloway himself, distinctive by the silver-embroidered vest he always wore. "Fall back," he ordered his remaining men. As the outlaws retreated, Jed seized his opportunity. He sprinted across the room and tackled Holloway just as the man was turning to flee. They crashed through the doorway onto the porch, wrestling for control of their weapons. Holloway was strong, his face twisted with rage as he slammed a fist into Jed's jaw. Stars exploded across Jed's vision, but he maintained his grip on the outlaw's wrist, preventing him from raising his revolver. "You're dead, bounty hunter," Holloway spat. "Not today," Jed growled back, driving his knee upward. The fight was brutal and quick. With a final desperate surge, Jed managed to slam Holloway's head against the porch railing. The outlaw went limp, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. As Jed struggled to his feet, he became aware of Rebecca standing in the doorway, her derringer still clutched in her hand. Their eyes met over Holloway's unconscious form. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Jed wiped blood from his split lip. "I've had worse." The aftermath was a blur of activity. 3 of Holloway's men were captured, 2 were wounded, and 2 escaped on foot. Sheriff Clayton organized posses to track the fugitives while the town doctor tended to injuries. Remarkably, none of the townspeople had been killed, though several suffered minor wounds. Rebecca moved through the crowd with quiet efficiency, helping the doctor by tearing strips of cloth for bandages and comforting frightened children. Jed watched her from where he sat on the steps outside, allowing Clayton to handcuff Holloway to a support beam until he regained consciousness. "You're full of surprises, Miss O'Hara," Jed said when she brought him a damp cloth for his bleeding lip. "As are you, Mr. James." She sat beside him on the step, her green dress dusty and torn at the hem. "I thought you'd be in Tucson by now." "Lucky for you I wasn't." Her expression grew serious. "Yes, lucky indeed." She hesitated. "Why did you come back?" Jed dabbed at his lip, avoiding her gaze. "Saw the tracks. It's my job to know when trouble's coming." "Is that all it was?" "Your job?" Something in her tone made him look up. Her eyes held no accusation, only genuine curiosity. "What else would it be?" he countered. Rebecca smiled faintly. "I don't know. Perhaps a moment of concern for your fellow human beings." Jed snorted. "I'm not the concerning type, Miss O'Hara. I think you are more than you admit, Mr. James." She stood, smoothing her ruined dress. "The schoolhouse will need a new window after those stray bullets. I don't suppose you know anything about carpentry. The request caught him off guard. I can manage basic repairs. Excellent. I'll expect you tomorrow morning then. With that, she walked back inside, leaving Jed staring after her in bewilderment. He told himself he would leave at dawn. The bounty on Holloway alone would set him up comfortably for months. There was no reason to linger in Sweetwater Creek, especially with Rebecca O'Hara's disconcerting ability to see through his carefully constructed facade. Yet morning found him at the schoolhouse, tools borrowed from the blacksmith in hand. The damage was worse than expected, not just a broken window, but bullet holes in the walls and a door hanging from one hinge. I wasn't sure you'd come, Rebecca admitted when she arrived, carrying a basket with bread and cheese. Most men would have collected their reward and ridden out. Jed hammered a nail with more force than necessary. I said I'd help. I keep my word. They worked together through the morning, falling into an unexpectedly comfortable rhythm. Rebecca was stronger than she looked, capable of holding boards in place while he secured them. She asked intelligent questions about his work as a bounty hunter, listening without judgment to his abbreviated answers. By late afternoon, they had repaired the worst of the damage. Jed found himself reluctant to finish the final tasks, aware that once completed, he'd have no reason to stay. Sheriff mentioned you're heading to Tucson next, Rebecca said as they sat on the schoolhouse steps, sharing the last of the bread. That was the plan. Jed wiped sweat from his brow. Though Clayton's offering a deputy position here, says the town could use someone with my experience. Rebecca's eyes brightened. Are you considering it? No, Jed said firmly. I don't put down roots. Why not? The directness of her question caught him off guard. Is it the war? I've noticed many veterans prefer to keep moving. Jed stared at her. How did you? The way you stand, the reflexes. My father had friends who served. They carried themselves similarly. She brushed crumbs from her skirt. They also tended to avoid connections, as if loving someone was a liability. It is. The words escaped before Jed could stop them. Love's just chains binding you to one place, one person, making you vulnerable. Rebecca studied him, her expression thoughtful. Is that what you truly believe? That love is imprisonment? Jed stood, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. I should finish that window before dark. But Rebecca wasn't deterred. She followed him back inside. I had a fiancé in Boston, she said quietly. The son of my father's business partner. It was arranged convenient. He wanted a wife who would be ornamental at dinner parties and invisible the rest of the time. Jed glanced at her, surprised by this personal revelation. What happened? I left. A simple answer, but her eyes conveyed the complexity behind it. I realized I'd rather be alone than tethered to a life without meaning or passion. So, perhaps I understand your fear of chains better than you think. I'm not afraid, Jed protested, measuring the window frame. I just prefer freedom. Rebecca handed him a nail with a smile that somehow reached into the carefully guarded places within him. Freedom isn't always what we think it is, Mr. James. 3 days later, Jed was still in Sweetwater Creek. He'd accepted a temporary deputy position, telling himself it was only until the town found someone permanent. The truth was more complicated, and it had everything to do with Rebecca O'Hara. Each morning, he found himself walking past the schoolhouse. Sometimes he'd stop, offering to fix a squeaky hinge or secure a loose board. Rebecca always welcomed him with that transformative smile, often inviting him to stay for lunch. They talked about books she was teaching the children, about places he'd seen in his travels, about the changing landscape of the Western Territories. Never had Jed spoken so much to another person. Something about Rebecca drew words from him that he hadn't even known were there, thoughts about justice, about the future of the frontier, about the war that had shaped him. She listened with genuine interest, challenging him when she disagreed, but never with judgment. The town noticed. Whispers followed them when they walked together to the general store, or when Rebecca stopped by the sheriff's office with freshly baked bread. Jed ignored the speculation, telling himself their friendship was temporary like his stay in town. The Founders' Day dance is next week, Sheriff Clayton mentioned casually one afternoon as they made their rounds. You planning to attend? Jed adjusted his deputy badge, still uncomfortable with its weight on his chest. Not much for dancing. Miss O'Hara mentioned she's never seen a proper Western celebration. Clayton's attempted nonchalance was painfully obvious. Shame if no one showed her what they're like. That evening, Jed found himself outside the schoolhouse after classes had ended. Rebecca was at her desk, grading papers by lamplight, her auburn hair falling loose around her shoulders. She looked up at his knock, surprise and pleasure brightening her face. "Deputy James, what brings you here so late?" Jed removed his hat, turning it awkwardly in his hands. "Thought you might like to attend the Founders' Day dance. As friends," he added hastily, "since you're new to town." Her smile widened. "I'd be delighted, though I should warn you, I learned to dance in Boston parlors. I might step on your toes." "I reckon I'll survive." He returned her smile with a rare one of his own. "I'll call for you at 7 then." Walking back to his rented room, Jed tried to ignore the unfamiliar lightness in his chest. It wasn't courting, he told himself firmly, just friendship, the kind that would end when he inevitably moved on. The night of the dance arrived clear and cool, the first hint of autumn in the air. Jed stood before the small mirror in his room, adjusting the clean shirt and vest he'd purchased specifically for the occasion. He barely recognized the man staring back at him, clean-shaven, hair neatly combed, a nervous expression replacing his usual stoic demeanor. Rebecca answered his knock, wearing a dress of deep blue that brought out the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. Her hair was arranged in an elegant style, with a few curls framing her face. "You look—" Words failed him. "Different?" she suggested with a teasing smile. "As do you. I've never seen you without stubble." He offered his arm, feeling uncharacteristically self-conscious. "Thought I should make an effort." The town hall was transformed once again, this time with autumn flowers and ribbons. A proper band had been assembled, fiddle, piano, and even a cello borrowed from a neighboring town. Nearly everyone in Sweetwater Creek had turned out, dressed in their finest. "It's wonderful," Rebecca breathed, taking in the festive atmosphere. "So much joy after everything that happened." Jed noticed how the townspeople greeted Rebecca warmly. In just weeks, she'd become an integral part of the community, beloved by her students and respected by their parents. She belonged here in a way he never had anywhere since the war. "Would you care to dance?" he asked as the band struck up a lively tune. Rebecca's expression was worth every moment of discomfort that followed as Jed navigated the unfamiliar steps. He'd never been much of a dancer, but her delight made his awkwardness seem inconsequential. When the music slowed, he hesitated, aware of how a more intimate dance might appear to onlookers. "We don't have to," Rebecca said, reading his reluctance. "No, I want to." And he realized with surprise that it was true. Her hand felt small in his as he placed his other hand at her waist. They moved together more naturally than he'd expected, finding a rhythm that required no words. "You're a man of contradictions, Jedediah James," she said softly. "The fearsome bounty hunter who reads poetry by lamplight." He'd forgotten he'd mentioned that to her. "Don't let that get around. Bad for my reputation." She laughed, the sound warming something long cold within him. "Your secret is safe with me." As the evening progressed, Jed found himself relaxing, even enjoying the company of the townspeople he'd kept at arm's length. After several dances, Rebecca suggested they step outside for air. The night was alive with stars, a sliver of moon providing just enough light to see by. They walked to a bench beneath an old oak tree, the sounds of music and laughter drifting from the hall. "Will you stay?" Rebecca asked suddenly. "In Sweetwater Creek?" Jed looked down at his hands. "I'm not the staying kind." "Why not?" She turned toward him, her face earnest in the moonlight. "What are you running from, Jed?" The use of his shortened name caught his attention. No one had called him Jed in years. It was too familiar, too intimate. "I'm not running," he insisted. "I'm just not made for settling down, for hearth and home and love," she finished for him. He met her gaze, finding no judgment there, only understanding. "I don't want love's chains," he said quietly. "I've seen what it does to people. Makes them weak, vulnerable, gets them killed." Rebecca's hand found his in the darkness. "Then call it freedom beside me." Her words stopped his breath. "What?" "Freedom beside me," she repeated. "Not chains binding you down, but wings lifting you up." That's what real love is, Jed. Not imprisonment, but liberation. He stared at her, this woman who had somehow breached the walls he'd built since Shiloh. You don't know what you're asking. I think I do. Her voice was gentle but firm. I'm asking you to consider that perhaps you've been running not from chains, but from the very freedom that terrifies you. Most, the freedom to be known, to be vulnerable, to care deeply for another person. Jed stood, needing distance from her perceptiveness. You deserve better than a man with blood on his hands. Shouldn't I be the judge of what I deserve? She rose too, facing him without retreat. I left Boston because I was suffocating in other people's expectations. I came west seeking something authentic, and I found it. In this town, in these people. Her voice softened. In you. The admission hung between them like a physical thing. Jed felt something shift inside him, some long, frozen part beginning to thaw. I don't know how to stay in one place, he confessed. I don't know how to be what you need. Rebecca stepped closer, close enough that he could see the determination in her eyes. I'm not asking you to be anything other than who you are. I'm just asking you to consider that perhaps who you are is more than the solitary hunter you've convinced yourself to be. Before he could respond, she rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, questioning, over almost before it began. But its effect on Jed was profound. For the first time in years, he felt fully present, anchored in the moment rather than planning his next escape. I should take you home, he said when she pulled away, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't name. Rebecca nodded, something like disappointment crossing her features. They walked in silence through the quiet streets, the sounds of the dance fading behind them. At her door, she turned to him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Thank you for a lovely evening, Mr. James. The formality stung. Rebecca, he began, then stopped uncertain. She waited, hope and wariness battling in her expression. I'm riding out to the Morrison place tomorrow, he said finally. They've been having trouble with coyotes getting their chickens. Thought you might like to come along, if you're not busy. It wasn't what she'd been hoping for, perhaps, but her smile became genuine. I'd like that very much. That night, Jed lay awake in his rented room, Rebecca's words echoing in his mind. Freedom beside me. The concept was foreign to everything he'd believed since the war had stolen his innocence and his faith. He'd survived by remaining detached, rootless, beholden to no one. The idea that connection could be freedom rather than constraint challenged the very foundation of his existence. Yet, as dawn broke, he found himself looking forward to the day ahead with an anticipation he hadn't felt in years. The Morrison farm lay several miles outside town, a modest homestead carved from the wilderness through sheer determination. Rebecca rode beside Jed on a gentle mare borrowed from the livery, her riding habit practical for the terrain. She was a competent rider, another surprise from this woman of seemingly endless layers. My father believed daughters should be as capable as sons, she explained when he commented on her skill. My mother was scandalized, but it served my sisters and me well. The day passed pleasantly as they helped the Morrison family build a more secure chicken coop. The couple's young children were delighted to have their teacher visit, showing off their reading skills and begging for stories. Jed watched in fascination as Rebecca engaged with them, her natural warmth and patience drawing out even the shyest child. You're good with them, he observed, as they rode back toward town, the sunset painting the landscape in gold and crimson. Rebecca smiled. Children are honest. They haven't learned to hide their true selves yet. She glanced at him. Unlike certain deputies I know. He chuckled, surprised at how easy it was becoming to laugh in her presence. I'm an open book. Hardly, she countered, though I'm learning to read between your lines. They stopped at a ridge overlooking the valley where Sweetwater Creek nestled against the foothills. In the fading light, the town looked peaceful, lamps beginning to glow in windows. It's beautiful, Rebecca murmured. I never imagined finding such beauty in a place so different from where I grew up. Jed studied her profile, struck by how right she looked against the western landscape, as if she belonged here far more than in some Boston parlor. Why did you really come west? He asked. The truth? Rebecca considered the question. I wanted to matter, she said finally. In Boston, I was decorative. Here I can make a difference. These children, many of them, would never learn to read or write without a proper school. She turned to him. Why did you become a bounty hunter? It was a fair exchange. After the war, I couldn't go back to ordinary life. Tracking, hunting it, was what I was good at. He paused. And the world has no shortage of men who deserve bringing to justice. Is that why you've stayed on as deputy? For justice? Jed looked away toward the town that was beginning to feel disturbingly like home. Partly. And the other part? The moment stretched between them, ripe with possibility. Jed knew his next words would either open a door or close it permanently. You, he admitted finally, the word barely audible. I stayed because of you. Rebecca's breath caught audibly. She reached across the space between their horses, her hand finding his. And now? Now I'm terrified, he confessed, the honesty startling them both. Terrified that if I let myself care too much, something will happen. The war taught me that everything can be taken in an instant. Yes, she agreed softly. It can. But isn't that precisely why we must seize the chance for happiness when it appears? Because tomorrow is guaranteed to no one. Her words penetrated the armor he'd worn for so long. I don't know if I remember how to be happy. Then let me remind you. Rebecca's eyes held his, unflinching in their sincerity. Day by day, no promises beyond what we can give each other in the moment, freedom beside each other. As the sun slipped below the horizon, Jed made his decision. Leaning across the space between them, he kissed her not with the hesitation of their first kiss, but with the certainty of a man who had finally stopped running. Autumn turned to winter, and Sweetwater Creek settled into the quieter rhythms of the cold season. The schoolhouse, now fully repaired and improved with Jed's carpentry skills, became a center of community activity. Rebecca organized a Christmas pageant that brought the entire town together. Children performing the nativity story with homemade costumes and more enthusiasm than Polish. Jed watched from the back of the room, his deputy badge no longer feeling strange on his chest. Sheriff Clayton stood beside him, nodding in approval at the proceedings. Never thought I'd see the day, Clayton commented. Jedediah James, settling down, thinking of putting down roots. Jed shrugged, uncomfortable with how transparent his transformation had apparently been. Town needs law enforcement. Clayton's knowing smile was irritating. Nothing to do with our schoolteacher, I'm sure. Before Jed could respond, Rebecca spotted him from across the room and smiled that smile that still made his heart stutter in his chest. She excused herself from the mothers she'd been speaking with and made her way to him. Deputy James, she greeted formally, though her eyes danced with private meaning. Sheriff, what did you think of our little production? Finest nativity I've seen west of the Mississippi, Clayton declared, though I suspect Joseph was carrying a 6-shooter under his robe. Rebecca laughed. Tommy insisted it was historically accurate. I decided some battles weren't worth fighting. As Clayton moved away to congratulate some of the children, Rebecca slipped her hand into Jed's. Walk me home? The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant against the velvet darkness. They walked in comfortable silence, their breath forming clouds in the winter air. At Rebecca's door, she invited him in for coffee, now a familiar routine that often led to long conversations by the fire. But tonight, as they settled into their usual chairs, Rebecca seemed preoccupied. What is it? Jed asked, knowing her expressions well enough now to recognize when something was on her mind. She met his gaze directly. Sheriff Clayton mentioned the deputy position will become permanent after the new year, with a salary increase. Jed nodded. He mentioned it to me, too. And, she prompted when he didn't continue, I told him I'd think about it. He studied her reaction carefully. It would mean staying, permanently. Rebecca set down her coffee cup. Is that something you want? The question hung between them, laden with unspoken implications. 6 months ago, the very idea would have sent him riding for the horizon. Now, he found himself contemplating a future in one place, with one person. I've been a drifter most of my adult life, he said slowly. Moving on when things got comfortable, when connections started forming. It was safer that way. Rebecca waited, allowing him the space to find his words. But lately, I've been thinking that safety isn't everything. He reached for her hand across the small table. That maybe there are things worth risking for, worth staying for. Such as? Her voice was barely above a whisper. A town that needs protection. Children who need to grow up feeling secure. He squeezed her fingers gently. A woman who somehow convinced me that freedom can be found in the very connections I've spent years avoiding. Rebecca's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Are you saying you'll take the position? I'm saying I want to build something here, something lasting. He drew a deep breath. With you, if you'll have me. The tears spilled over then as Rebecca rose from her chair and came to kneel beside him. I would have you in any capacity, Jedediah James. As deputy, as friend, as husband, he finished, surprising himself with the word that had been forming in his mind for weeks. Her smile was radiant through her tears. Is that a proposal, deputy? Jed pulled her into his arms, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. The most inelegant one in history, I suspect. Rebecca laughed, the sound filling the small cabin with joy. I don't need elegance. I just need you. The real you, not the lone hunter, not the stoic deputy, but the man I've come to know and love. The word love hung between them, not frightening as Jed had once imagined, but comforting, like coming home after a long journey. I love you, he said, testing the words that had been foreign to him for so long. And I want to build a life with you here, not because I'm chained, but because I've found freedom beside you. Their kiss sealed the promise, a beginning rather than an ending. Outside, snow began to fall, covering Sweetwater Creek in a blanket of white, the world renewed and full of possibility. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. The wedding took place in the town church, with Sheriff Clayton giving the bride away and the school children singing a song they'd composed themselves for the occasion. Rebecca wore her mother's lace veil with a simple blue dress that matched the forget-me-nots in her bouquet. Jed, uncomfortable in his new suit but determined to do things properly, watched her walk toward him with a sense of wonder that this remarkable woman had chosen him. Freedom beside me, she whispered as they exchanged vows, a private reminder of the promise that had brought them together. As they stepped out into the sunshine as husband and wife, Sweetwater Creek cheered for the schoolteacher and the former bounty hunter, who had found in each other not chains, but wings.